In the summer of 1937, a man named Jorgen Skafte Rasmussen stood before the largest motorcycle factory on the face of the earth and watched 55,000 machines roll off its assembly lines in a single year. His factory in Schopau, a small Saxon town buried in the Ore Mountains of Germany, was producing more motorcycles than any other manufacturer in the world. Not more than any German manufacturer, more than any manufacturer anywhere. He was 60 years old. He had built this empire from a 40 cubic centimeter toy engine that a child could hold in both hands. The workers called him a genius. The German press called his machines Das kleine Wunder, the little wonder. His cars were outselling every competitor in Germany except one. His racing division, under the banner of Auto Union, was writing the fastest chapters in motorsport history. He did not know it then. Standing in that factory in 1937, surveying the rows of machines and the smell of grease and metal shavings and ambition, Jorgen Skafte Rasmussen could not have known. The empire he was looking at was already carrying the seed of its own destruction, buried so deeply inside its greatest triumph that no one would see it clearly for another 3 decades. The seed was simple. It had 2 strokes. DKW was built on the 2-stroke engine. It had always used the 2-stroke engine. Every motorcycle, every car, every delivery van that rolled out of its factories ran on 2-stroke technology. That engine was DKW's identity, its competitive advantage, its engineering philosophy, and its reason for existing. It was also, in the end, the reason it ceased to exist. This is not a story of bad luck. It is not a story of foreign competition or wartime destruction or economic misfortune, though all of those played their roles. This is the story of a company that built the most dominant small car brand in pre-war Germany, that pioneered front-wheel drive a full 3 years before Citroën, that produced a motorcycle so perfectly designed that Harley-Davidson, BSA, and Yamaha all copied it, and that then refused, for 30 years, through every warning sign, through every declining sales figure, through every moment when the future was visible to anyone who looked, refused to walk away from the engine that had made it great. Welcome inside the factory at Schopau, where the world's most influential 2-stroke empire built everything it needed to survive, and then chose not to use it. The Ore Mountains in winter look like something painted by a man who had given up on warmth. The towns are gray and cold and self-sufficient, built on the logic of industry and nothing else. Into one of those towns in 1907 came a 30-year-old Danish engineer named Jorgen Skafte Rasmussen, who had studied his trade in Chemnitz and decided he would rather build something than go home. Rasmussen was not a romantic. He was a pragmatist with a gift for seeing what people needed before they knew they needed it. His first business, a small firm called Rasmussen and Ernst, made steam boiler armatures and exhaust oil separators, the unglamorous hardware of industrial plumbing. It was not the kind of thing that made men famous. But it kept the lights on, and it gave Rasmussen a workshop, and a workshop was all he ever really needed. In 1916, wartime petrol shortages pushed him toward a new experiment. He wanted to build a car that ran on steam, a Dampfkraftwagen, as the Germans said, a steam-powered vehicle. The project was technically ambitious and commercially pointless. Steam cars were already dying, outcompeted by petrol engines that were cheaper and simpler to operate. Rasmussen built his prototype, tested it, and abandoned it. He kept the name. DKW, the abbreviation of the German word for steam-powered vehicle. The failed dream became the brand. What replaced the steam idea was more practical and far more consequential. In 1919, Rasmussen built a 40 cubic centimeter 2-stroke engine and marketed it as a toy, a novelty power unit for model vehicles. He called it Des Knaben Wunsch, which translates from German as the boy's wish. It was an extraordinary small thing, simple in design, reliable in function, and cheap to produce. It became a stationary power unit. Then it became a bicycle auxiliary engine. Then it became something more. By 1921, Rasmussen had built his first complete motorized vehicle. By 1922, he had produced his first true motorcycle, and the DKW name had been trademarked. The machines had a quality that their competitors lacked. They worked. In a Germany still reeling from hyperinflation, Still raw from the humiliations of the Treaty of Versailles, cheap and reliable transportation was not a luxury. It was a lifeline. DKW motorcycles cost less to buy and less to maintain than almost anything else on two wheels. Germans bought them in extraordinary numbers. By 1926, Rasmussen had put the first assembly line into operation at Schopau, producing a machine called the E206. By 1929, 60,000 motorcycles a year were leaving that single factory. The world's largest motorcycle manufacturer had been built in 12 years by a Danish engineer who started out making plumbing hardware. The foundation was laid. But here is what the ledgers were already showing. Every single one of those 60,000 motorcycles ran on a two-stroke engine. DKW was not just using the two-stroke, it was becoming the two-stroke. It was the machine and the engine were the same thing, inseparable, fused together at the level of identity. And that fusion, in 1929, looked like strength. It would take 37 more years for anyone to understand that it was a trap. Success in motorcycles gave Rasmussen capital, and capital gave him ambition. In 1928, he used that ambition to purchase a controlling interest in a struggling automobile manufacturer in the nearby town of Zwickau. The company was called Audi Werke AG. It was losing money, its cars were over-engineered for a market that wanted cheapness, and Rasmussen bought it the way a man buys an empty lot, not for what was on it, but for what could be built there. What he built there was the DKW front. The concept came to Rasmussen simply. Take the two-stroke motorcycle engine that DKW already manufactured, mount it transversely at the front of a small car, drive the front wheels directly, and eliminate the complications of a rear-wheel drive layout. The result would be lighter, cheaper, and mechanically simpler than any comparable vehicle. His engineers, working with the Audi design team he had just acquired, executed that concept with precision. The car they built had a two-cylinder, two-stroke engine of 584 cubic centimeters, producing 18 horsepower. It rode on swing axles front and rear. Its body was built of wood with leatherette upholstery, simple and sturdy and unpretentious. The DKW F1 was introduced at the Berlin Automobile Exhibition in 1931. It was the first front-wheel drive car produced in volume in Europe. Not the first prototype, not the first concept. The first car that ordinary Germans could actually walk into a showroom and buy. It was 3 years ahead of the Citroën Traction Avant, which history has most often credited with pioneering the front-wheel drive layout. DKW was first. The public response was overwhelming. By 1934, DKW had reached second place in overall German automobile sales, holding more than 16% of the entire market. The F-Series cars, F1 through F8, each an evolution of the original concept, became the most popular small cars in Northern Europe. By 1938, the Zwickau factory was producing nearly 5,000 units a month. Production of the small F-Series totaled approximately 218,000 units between 1931 and 1942. Rasmussen had not just built a successful car, he had built the template for the modern automobile. Front-wheel drive with a transversely mounted engine is the configuration used in the vast majority of passenger cars produced on Earth today. Every front-wheel drive hatchback you have ever seen in a city street owes something to the logic that Rasmussen and his engineers worked out in a factory in Saxony in the early 1930s. The tragedy building quietly underneath all of this was the same as before. Every one of those 218,000 cars used a two-stroke engine. The engine that had made DKW great in motorcycles was now making DKW great in automobiles. The company was not diversifying, it was deepening. It was investing more of its identity, its engineering expertise, its manufacturing infrastructure, and its public image into a single technical bet. And for now, the bet was paying. Everything was paying. The empire was at the beginning of its most dangerous phase, the phase where success feels permanent. The Great Depression arrived in Germany with particular violence. By 1932, unemployment had reached nearly 30%. Industrial output had collapsed. Companies that had looked invincible in 1928 were facing extinction. DKW, despite its strong sales, was not immune. The cost of manufacturing both motorcycles and automobiles at volume, combined with the broader economic collapse, put serious pressure on Rasmussen's finances. The solution was consolidation. In June of 1932, Rasmussen's DKW merged with 3 other Saxon automobile manufacturers: Audi Werke, which Rasmussen already partly owned; Horch Werke AG, the luxury car company founded by engineer August Horch; and the automotive division of Wanderer Werke. The new entity was called Auto Union AG, headquartered in Chemnitz, and its emblem was 4 interlocking rings, one for each founding company. Those 4 rings are still the logo of Audi today. Within the merger, DKW occupied the lowest rung of the market. Horch made expensive luxury cars. Audi and Wanderer served the middle classes. DKW made affordable vehicles for workers. It was a natural and sensible division. What nobody debated at the time, because there was nothing to debate, was that DKW would continue making 2-stroke engines. In 1934, Rasmussen himself departed. He had clashed with the Auto Union board over strategic direction, and he left, taking with him a smaller company called Framo that he had established separately. He was 56 years old. He had founded DKW, built it into the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer, pioneered front-wheel drive in European automobiles, survived hyperinflation and depression, and created the company that would eventually become Audi. He retired to Denmark. He died in 1964 at the age of 85, long after the mark he created had been erased. His departure removed from DKW the one man who might have questioned the 2-stroke doctrine, who had enough authority and enough vision to ask whether the engine that had made the company great was still the right engine for its future. Without him, the question went unasked. What his successors inherited was not just a company, it was a philosophy. DKW meant 2-stroke engines the way Horch meant luxury, and Audi meant engineering refinement. To change that would have meant changing what DKW was, and the men who ran it after Rasmussen left had no appetite for an identity crisis. The problem was already visible to anyone who looked. The automotive world was moving toward 4-stroke technology. Every serious competitor outside DKW's niche, Opel, Ford, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, used 4-stroke engines. The 2-stroke was efficient at small displacements and simple to manufacture, but it became progressively less competitive as engine sizes grew. DKW's engineers knew this. They had known it since the early 1930s. They kept building 2-strokes anyway. And for now, the sales figures gave them every reason to feel vindicated. This was the summit. This was the moment when, if you had walked through DKW's world with full knowledge of what was coming, the scale of the coming fall would have made you hold your breath. In 1937, Auto Union became, for the second time in its history, the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer. The Schopau factory alone produced 55,470 motorcycles in that single year. Exports had reached markets on 6 continents. The DKW name appeared on motorcycles sold from Argentina to Australia, from South Africa to Scandinavia. The company's 2-stroke engines were being used not just in road vehicles, but in aircraft power supplies, agricultural machinery, stationary generators, and boat motors. The DKW-6, 3 cubic centimeter model airplane motor, exhibited at the International Automobile and Motorcycle Exhibition in Berlin in 1938, was described in the press as the smallest working production engine ever made. On the automobile side, DKW was outselling everyone in Germany except Opel. The F-Series cars had evolved through 8 generations in 6 years, each one slightly more refined than the last. The cars were practical, economical, accessible, and built on a technical architecture that was genuinely innovative. DKW had also developed a remarkable V4 two-stroke engine for a series of rear-wheel drive models called the Schwebeklasse and Sonderklasse, with displacement of 1,000 and later 1,100 cubic centimeters. These engines had two extra cylinders that functioned as air compressors for forced induction, giving them the external appearance of a V6 while maintaining pure two-stroke operating principles. Under the Auto Union Racing banner, the company's reputation extended to the highest levels of motorsport. Ferdinand Porsche had designed the Auto Union Grand Prix cars, massive mid-engined machines powered by V16 and later V12 supercharged engines. Driven by Hans Stuck, Bernd Rosemeyer, and later Tadzio Nuvolari, the Auto Union Silver Arrows dominated Grand Prix racing between 1934 and 1939 alongside their Mercedes-Benz rivals. By 1936, Auto Union race cars were reaching 380 kilometers per hour on the Avus track in Berlin. The power levels achieved by those pre-war cars would not be reached again in Formula One until the early 1980s. DKW's motorcycle racing team won the European Championship 4 consecutive times in the 1930s. In the 1938 Isle of Man Tourist Trophy, DKW rider Ewald Kluge recorded a top speed of 183 kilometers per hour on a 250 cubic centimeter machine. The machines were fast, reliable, and scientifically dominant. Then something nobody wanted to name out loud began to stir. In a prototype room in Zwickau, DKW's chief engineers had developed a new 3-cylinder two-stroke engine with a displacement of 900 cubic centimeters and an output of 30 horsepower. It was a better engine than anything DKW currently put into a car. They fitted it to a streamlined prototype body and proved it could achieve 115 kilometers per hour. The car was called the F9. It was ready for production. The year was 1939. Europe was about to go to war, and the F9 would wait. By the autumn of 1944, the DKW factory at Schopau was operating on borrowed time in every sense. The civilian world had effectively ceased to exist. The plant was producing motorcycles, NZ350 and RT125 models, for the Wehrmacht, whose dispatch riders considered the small DKW a far nimbler and more practical machine than the heavy 4-stroke BMWs and Zundaps that the German military preferred for sidecar use. The annual turnover of Auto Union reached 740 million Reichmarks in 1944, the peak figure in the company's history. That number is worth holding in the mind. 740 million Reichmarks. The empire was, on paper, at its most financially formidable at the exact moment when the structures that sustained it were about to be obliterated. The darkest chapter of that year is one that the post-war narrative of DKW spent decades avoiding. From the autumn of 1944, the Schopau factory used forced labor to maintain production. 500 Jewish women transported from Auschwitz, approximately 300 from Hungary, 137 from Poland, and the remainder from France, Slovakia, Italy, Greece, and other countries, were put to work producing parts for aircraft and vehicle construction. They were housed first in the factory's secondary school, then on the unfurnished upper floor of a factory building on the DKW compound, guarded by SS personnel. 5 documented deaths occurred during their time at the facility. In April 1945, as Allied forces advanced, the women were loaded into open cattle wagons and sent on a week-long journey to Theresienstadt. This history is documented in the records of the Flossenburg concentration camp memorial. It is part of the story of DKW, as it is part of the story of most large German industrial enterprises of the 1930s and 40s. On the 19th of March 1945, Allied bombing missed the Schopau factory itself, but struck the DKW workers' housing estate, killing 23 people. On the 3rd of July, by order of the Soviet military administration, the systematic dismantling of the entire DKW factory began. Every piece of equipment was crated and shipped to the Soviet Union. DKW's chief engineer, Hermann Weber, who had worked for the company since 1922, was transferred to the Soviet city of Izhevsk to supervise the reconstruction of the dismantled equipment in a Soviet motorcycle factory. Weber died in Izhevsk in September 1948, a long way from the factory he had given his working life to build. What the Soviets left behind in Chopau was an empty shell. The machines were gone. The engineers were gone or dead. The factory that had been the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer 8 years earlier was reduced to walls and concrete floors. Meanwhile, the auto union plants in Zwickau, the car factories, fell under Soviet occupation and were nationalized into the East German state machinery. The pre-war DKW cars continued to be produced there under the state brand IFA, and the designs later evolved into the Wartburg and the Trabant, the quintessential automobiles of East German communism. DKW's engineering DNA would outlive DKW itself by several more decades, preserved, perversely, by the government that had seized the company. Two men saved DKW from complete disappearance. They were not engineers or visionaries. They were pragmatists with a sense of timing and a filing cabinet full of legal registrations. Dr. Richard Brune, the pre-war managing director of Auto Union, and Dr. Karl Hahn, his deputy, had quietly registered the names Auto Union and DKW in West Germany in 1947, initially to operate a spare parts business for the large number of pre-war DKW vehicles still running on West German roads. By 1949, they had done more than register names. They had found a former Rheinmetall gun factory in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, and begun the process of restarting automobile production. On the 3rd of September 1949, Auto Union GmbH was formally relaunched. The West German government, eager to stimulate industrial recovery and employment, provided critical support. The first vehicle was a van, the Schnelllaster F800, a delivery vehicle using the same engine as the last pre-war F8. Then, in 1950, came the first post-war DKW car, the Meisterklasse F89, a saloon body built by the coach builder Karmann, fitted with a two-cylinder, 700 cubic centimeter two-stroke engine. It was, in all important respects, the pre-war F8 rebuilt from surviving blueprints. The engineers knew this was a stopgap. The real goal was the F9, the three-cylinder prototype that had been ready in 1939. But those engine blueprints had ended up in East Germany, in the hands of the state-owned IFA operation in Zwickau. West German DKW had to develop the three-cylinder engine independently. By 1953, they had done it. The F91, DKW's first genuinely new post-war car, arrived with a 900 cubic centimeter three-cylinder two-stroke engine producing 34 horsepower. 2 years later, the F93 arrived with 38 horsepower. The cars were well-liked. Germany's post-war economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder, was lifting millions of families into the middle class for the first time. Affordable, practical transportation was in enormous demand. DKW's front-wheel drive, three-cylinder cars found buyers quickly and in volume. The rally results followed. DKW became the most winning car brand in the European Rally Championships for several years during the 1950s, with victories at the East African Safari Rally in 1956 and the Acropolis Rally in 1959. The problem was already visible to anyone who looked. The engineers in Ingolstadt were refining a technology that had been essentially fixed since the 1930s. The gap between two-stroke and four-stroke performance, fuel economy, and emissions was not shrinking, it was growing, and the customers were beginning to feel it. There is a specific kind of triumph that only becomes performance with other quicks to be there watering this point, and there is a specific kind of triumph that only becomes formidable hits from the reported. There was a specific kind of triumph that only becomes formidable hit of just triumph. In terms of enbritted before missed working to the car. There is a specific kind of triumph that only becomes performance between two-stroke and four-stroke and four-stroke. There is a specific kind of triumph. There is a specific kind of triumph that only becomes performance with all of the transport to support. They're working towards huge between one four-stroke performance break the mid to the special time. The real dead the transport test of operations of the K and confusionly perform depart seconds. the most stroke four-stroke performance, and showed us to the life and southernated with proch property pendants. The problems provide pseudosize at the inch of levels broadcare with 1950s, but the problems is the light of man move. The criminative program in blue have involved in the 1950 wait for the two-stroke four-stroke. The break-in to reach out that are well misfollow the car and making 24 below and for making many. The involve this beginning to potential to the real change. The David believe that had it been knowns well that sense of important were literally make many could. The involve the chance pertesity was broad carrying to the acritical carblic problems of the two-stroke, the numereason's senses in quickly dead. The criminative program is also well as looking at it the two-stroke and reported, but the weather involved preserves in four-stroke. The break-in together is many felt upon until themself. The very story was most involved around in the concept of journey, the break-in the changes breaking to take four flacture of the car. The break-in to take this heatment even well the proof to see the two-stroke and four-stroke performs and making the city of more than working. The break-in the genuinely filled and extremely fit in and break the world. The inch of levels looks at of the design problems that had been depend in the two-stroke. The W's work since primital evil het that the two-stroke and reported was graded well and break. Sometimes let's see the influence of car and looking at the video time for the two-stroke and stop the reported advired. The break-in to serve the break-in to just the cud that been enough together and just what we needed it. The additional doesn't before than reported and for them directly in the life. The only enges officially primital evil setting and makes the reason working with record partments of the car, and the break-in still find it interest and better than for themselves. The W's this is 4,000 performance of other access were released for the inches. The Germany's in Ingolstadt was less than visit involved in. The Germany's in Ingolstadt was probably communication to for than reported. The break-in to be there as a generally experts of company with most performance of car. The break-in study literally proved together, but the nother people do and blundering forms. The controlling meeting decisions violent and still. The break-in to the states still provide the latest state and nother working it. The break-in was also looked and the engineering adults will begin to experts for all of these engineers. The break-in towards life and since the DKWs become the month team and love in working in. The break-in will well decide health even involved in silves, which is the grutivet standard in stuv in the showed up. The break-in will break-in and money then group and wording to break-in willing to love and serves in. The break-in willing to love and flowing a little bit. The break-in will well decide health even involved in silves in the triumph that only becomes visible in retrospect, when you learn that the thing you built was so good that the people who defeated you in the market were building their empires on a copy of your design. That is what happened to DKW's RT-125 motorcycle. The RT-125 had been introduced in 1940. It was a 123 cubic centimeter two-stroke machine that weighed 90 kilograms and proved ideal for the Wehrmacht's dispatch riders who needed a small, light, reliable vehicle that could navigate difficult terrain. Approximately 21,000 were built before the war ended and production paused. The military's assessment was unambiguous. It was the best lightweight motorcycle in service. As part of Germany's post-war reparations settlement, the design drawings of the RT-125 were handed over to the Allies. Harley-Davidson received a set, BSA received a set, Soviet manufacturers received a set. The results were, respectively, the Harley-Davidson Hummer, the BSA Bantam, and the Soviet Kovrov K125. All of them were, in essence, DKW motorcycles with different badges. Then, in 1955, a Japanese musical instrument company in Hamamatsu decided to enter the motorcycle business. They reverse-engineered the RT-125 and released their version under the name YA-1. The company was Yamaha. The YA-1 was Yamaha's first product, the machine that launched one of the most successful motorcycle manufacturers in history. The DKW design, intended as an affordable German utility vehicle, had become the template for the global lightweight motorcycle industry. Companies from Poland, Italy, Russia, Great Britain, the United States, and Japan had all built their early reputations on variations of the machine that DKW engineers designed in Schopau before the war. And yet, by the mid-1950s, DKW's own motorcycle division was struggling. The post-war boom in motorcycle sales was peaking. As West German prosperity grew, consumers were graduating to automobiles. Motorcycle registrations, which had surged through the early part of the decade, began to flatten and then decline. DKW's Hummel, a small scooter-type machine introduced in 1956, was a modest success, but it could not reverse the structural shift in consumer preference. By 1958, DKW motorcycle production had ceased to be profitable. The motorcycle division was eventually sold to Zweirad Union. The world had copied DKW's greatest motorcycle design and built global industries on it. DKW itself could no longer sell motorcycles in significant volume. The market had moved on, and DKW was watching it go. Meanwhile, in a boardroom in Ingolstadt, nobody was asking the question that needed to be asked. If the market was moving on from two-stroke motorcycles, what did that mean for two-stroke automobiles? The year 1958 was, in the history of DKW's decline, the year when the path forward was most clearly visible and most clearly refused. Daimler-Benz acquired a controlling interest in Auto Union in 1957, purchasing the company from a previous shareholder consortium. The arrival of Mercedes-Benz management brought with it a different set of engineering standards and a different view of the future. The Mercedes engineers assigned to assess Auto Union's technical operations were not impressed by the two-stroke commitment. Their assessment was direct. The two-stroke engine, in automobile applications above 800 cubic centimeters, was fighting a losing battle against four-stroke competitors on fuel economy, emissions, refinement, and power output. Mercedes-Benz seconded a designer named Ludwig Krauss to Auto Union in 1961 to guide the development of future models. Krauss was not subtle about his conclusions. He wanted a four-stroke engine. He produced a newly developed flat-four boxer engine that he had been working on for a mid-range Mercedes prototype that had not proceeded to production. He presented it to the Auto Union board as the obvious powertrain for the company's next car. The Auto Union engineering team considered it and declined. The boxer engine was dismissed as unsuitable. The arguments were technical, but the subtext was cultural. DKW's engineers had spent 40 years developing two-stroke expertise. Their careers, their institutional knowledge, their professional identities were built on the two-stroke. Adopting a four-stroke engine from Mercedes-Benz would have meant acknowledging that everything they had built was obsolete. The compromise that emerged was a newly developed 1,176 cubic centimeter three-cylinder two-stroke, more powerful than anything DKW had previously fitted to a car. It was better than the old engine. It was not better than a four-stroke. It was the last gasp of a technology betting on itself one final time. The car it was fitted to was the F102, DKW's final new model, introduced in the autumn of 1963. It was a handsome car, a genuinely modern-looking front-wheel drive saloon with unitary construction, disc brakes, and a top speed approaching 150 kilometers per hour in its most powerful form. The DKW Junior had been the most successful small car in West Germany. Now, the F102 was supposed to carry the brand into a new era. Here is what the silence in that boardroom meant. They were celebrating. The clock had already started. Volume production of the DKW F102 began in March of 1964, approximately 6 months after the car's official introduction. The delay was itself a warning sign. DKW engineers had spent those 6 months working out mechanical problems in the new three-cylinder engine, problems significant enough to require redesign before the car could be built at scale. The most damaging problem was the automatic fresh oil system, a device that DKW had developed jointly with Bosch to eliminate the need for drivers to mix oil with petrol, a feature of all two-stroke engines that had long been considered a drawback in terms of convenience. The system was innovative. It was also unreliable. In cold winter weather, the oil in the reservoir became too viscous to flow properly through the lubrication system. Engines seized. During prolonged coasting with a closed throttle, a standard driving behavior, the engine could be starved of oil and damaged. Approximately one-third of all F102 owners reported significant engine problems during the car's first year on the market. The resulting parts exchange program cost Auto Union millions of marks at precisely the moment when the company could least afford it. Sales figures, rather than recovering from the low levels of the early 1960s, fell further. Daimler-Benz looked at those numbers in 1964 and made a decision. Mercedes-Benz had not bought Auto Union to lose money indefinitely on a two-stroke car that customers did not want. An 87% stake in Auto Union was sold to Volkswagen in 1964, with the transfer of the Ingolstadt factory and trademark rights completed by the 1st of January 1965, when Volkswagen acquired a controlling 50.3% share. Volkswagen had no illusions about what they were purchasing. They were buying industrial capacity for Beetle assembly. The DKW brand was, in their calculation, an afterthought, a dying name attached to a dying technology. Between 1965 and 1969, 348,000 Volkswagen 1200s and 1300s were assembled in the Ingolstadt plant, while DKW and the F102 quietly expired alongside them. Volkswagen did, however, complete the project that Krauss had begun. The F102 body, which was well-designed and structurally sound, was fitted with a Mercedes-Benz four-cylinder, four-stroke engine of 1,700 cubic centimeters, given rectangular headlights and a revised front fascia, and relaunched at the Frankfurt Motor Show in September 1965 under a different name, not DKW. The DKW name was too associated with the two-stroke engine, too damaged by the F102's reputation, too old to carry a new car into a new decade. The car needed a fresh identity. Volkswagen reached into the history of Auto Union and found a name that had not been used on a production car since 1938. They called it Audi. In March of 1966, production of the DKW F102 ceased at the Ingolstadt factory. 52,753 units had been manufactured in approximately 2 years, a number that, against the ambitions that had been attached to the car's launch, constituted failure by any measurement. The assembly lines did not stop cleanly. Thousands of completed F102s sat unsold in and around the factory as dealers worked to clear inventory into 1967. The two-stroke era in West German passenger car manufacturing had not ended with a dramatic announcement or a ceremonial final car. It ended the way most industrial eras end, with paperwork and silence and a lot of cars that nobody particularly wanted to buy. DKW's engineers, in one last attempt to demonstrate that the two-stroke still had a future, had been developing a V6 engine created by combining two three-cylinder two-stroke units into a single 60-degree V configuration. The resulting engine had a displacement of 1,288 cubic centimeters in its final form, producing 83 horsepower in standard twin carburetor configuration, 100 horsepower with 4 carburetors, and 130 horsepower with 6. It weighed only 84 kilograms. Approximately 100 of these V6 engines were built for testing, and 13 F102 prototypes were fitted with them. Volkswagen examined the V6 project and terminated it. They were not interested in further investment in two-stroke research. The four-stroke future was decided. What remained of DKW outside Germany continued for a few more years. In Brazil, the VMAG company had been producing DKW cars under license since 1957. The F91, F94, and subsequent models adapted for Brazilian road conditions and consumer preferences. By the time Volkswagen completed its acquisition of VMAG in 1967, 109,343 DKW vehicles had been built in Brazil. Volkswagen shut down DKW production immediately and replaced it with the Volkswagen 1600. In Argentina, IASF continued making DKW variants until 1969, with a final production figure of 32,628 vehicles. In Ireland, an assembly plant in Ballincollig, County Cork, had been producing DKW vehicles under license since 1952, assembling saloons, vans, motorcycles, and even commercial combine harvesters. Roughly 4,000 vehicles left that facility before it closed around 1964. For years after its closure, the large DKW sign remained visible on the factory wall. The building was eventually demolished in the late 2000s and replaced with an Aldi's supermarket and a McDonald's drive-thru. The fate of the Irish factory is perhaps the most honest summary of what happened to DKW. A name that had once represented the world's most innovative transportation engineering was replaced on the same physical ground by a budget grocery chain and a fast food restaurant. On the 10th of September, 1965, at the International Motor Show in Frankfurt, Volkswagen unveiled the car that had been built on DKW's final chassis, fitted with a DKW-designed body, assembled in a DKW factory by DKW workers, and sold under the name of Audi. The launch was masterfully handled. The brochure presenting the new car made no mention of DKW. The word did not appear in the press materials. The connection to the F-102 was acknowledged in technical specifications, but not foregrounded in the narrative. Volkswagen wanted a clean break, and they achieved one with surgical precision. The new car was positioned as something entirely new, the revival of a historic pre-war name, a fresh beginning for the Ingolstadt factory, a modern four-stroke saloon for the aspirational West German family. The car worked. The Audi F103, with its 1,700 cubic centimeter four-cylinder engine producing 72 horsepower, was well received. It was followed by the Audi 72, the Audi Super 90, the Audi 60, the Audi 80. The merger with NSU Motorenwerke in 1969 created the formal entity Audi NSU Auto Union AG. In 1985, after years of further evolution, the company was renamed Audi AG. Today, Audi AG is one of the most profitable automobile manufacturers in the world. Its annual revenues exceed 60 billion euros. Its Quattro all-wheel drive system, its turbocharged inline five-cylinder engines, its aluminum space frame construction, its victories at Le Mans, all of these are part of a heritage that traces directly, without interruption, to the factory in Ingolstadt where DKW engineers built the last two-stroke automobile sold in Western Europe. The four rings on every Audi are the four rings of Auto Union. They represent Horch, Audi, Wanderer, and DKW, the four companies that merged in 1932. Three of those names are gone. The fourth ring, the one that stands for DKW, is still there, carried in metal on every Audi vehicle produced anywhere on Earth, worn by a brand that never acknowledges it. The DKW engineers who designed the F102 body, the DKW workers who assembled the first Audis, the DKW engineering tradition of front-wheel drive and transverse engine mounting that informed every subsequent Audi model. None of this appears in Audi's official history. The brochure from 1965 set the terms of the erasure. DKW was the foundation that the new building was constructed on, and then quietly buried beneath the concrete. There is a particular cruelty in the story of DKW's competition record during the years of its commercial decline. The cars that could not attract enough buyers in showrooms were, simultaneously, winning races across Europe and Africa with regularity. The Auto Union 1000, the successor to the F93, introduced in 1958 with a 1,000 cubic centimeter three-cylinder two-stroke engine producing 44 or 50 horsepower in standard and sport versions, was a genuine performer on difficult road surfaces. The light weight of the two-stroke engine, a direct consequence of the simplicity of the design, gave DKW vehicles a power-to-weight ratio that four-stroke competitors often struggled to match at comparable price points. The Auto Union 1000 achieved outright victory at the East African Safari Rally in 1958 and the Acropolis Rally in Greece in 1959. These were not class victories in a small engine category, they were outright wins against all competitors. DKW cars had been the most winning brand in the European Rally Championship for extended periods during the 1950s. The DKW Junior, the entry-level model introduced in 1959 and continuing through the F11 and F12 variants until 1965, maintained that competitive legacy. And F12 finished third overall at the Monte Carlo Historique Rally as recently as 2015, a testament to the basic soundness of the DKW chassis and suspension design. But sporting success operates on a different logic from commercial survival. A car that wins rallies and struggles to sell in showrooms is a car with a problem that prize trophies cannot solve. The DKW two-strokes refinement deficit, the characteristic buzzing sound, the oil consumption requirements, the need to mix fuel and oil, the acceleration characteristics that differed from four-stroke behavior, accumulated as a competitive disadvantage in the civilian market even as the cars performed brilliantly in competition. Then something nobody wanted to name out loud reached its logical end. The same qualities that made the two-stroke competitive in rally stages, lightweight, simplicity, responsive power delivery, were the qualities that four-stroke engineers had been systematically replicating in smaller, more efficient packages throughout the 1950s and early 1960s. By the time the F102 arrived in 1964, there was no performance argument left to make. The four-stroke had won. The last DKW rally victory and the last DKW production car occupied the same narrow band of years. The competitive program ended at the same moment as the production program. The factory that had once put 10,000 machines a month on European roads was assembling Volkswagen Beetles. In 1969, Volkswagen merged Auto Union GmbH with NSU Motorenwerke, a separate Bavarian manufacturer that had developed the Wankel rotary engine. The merged entity was named Audi NSU Auto Union AG. The NSU name disappeared from production cars by 1977. The Auto Union name disappeared as a corporate identifier when the company was renamed Audi AG in 1985. The DKW trademark passed into the ownership of Auto Union GmbH, a wholly owned subsidiary of Audi AG established in 1985 to hold the historical intellectual property of the original Auto Union Combine. The subsidiary owns the rights to the DKW name, the Horch name, the Wanderer name, and the original Auto Union racing heritage. It licenses the use of historical trademarks for merchandise, memorabilia, and heritage events. The DKW trademark is, in the language of corporate property law, an asset. In the history of automotive engineering, it is something considerably more significant. The Saab 92, widely credited as one of the most aerodynamically advanced production cars of its era when it was introduced in 1950, was designed around a two-stroke engine modeled directly on DKW's pre-war units. The Saab company's early commitment to two-stroke technology, which persisted until 1967, was an explicit tribute to what DKW had built. Yamaha's first motorcycle, the entire BSA Bantam lineage, the Soviet Izhevsk motorcycle factory that DKW's own chief engineer was forced to establish. All of these institutions carry DKW's engineering DNA. The front-wheel drive layout with a transversely mounted engine that DKW pioneered in 1931 is not an historical curiosity. It is the configuration of approximately 70% of all passenger cars produced on Earth today. Every front-wheel drive vehicle you have ever seen, every Volkswagen Golf, every Honda Civic, every Toyota Corolla, every Ford Focus, is built on the template that Rasmussen and his engineers developed in a Saxony factory almost a century ago. Meanwhile, in Schopau, the factory that had once been the world's greatest motorcycle manufacturer continued operating under the MZ name until December of 2008, when its Malaysian backers withdrew financial support after years of losses. The factory closed. 88 years of continuous motorcycle production ended in a single day. The buildings still stand, most of them. The loading docks have begun to decay. Return for a moment to that summer in May 1937. Return to Jorn Skafte Rasmussen's factory at Schopau. to the smell of metal and grease and ambition, to 55,000 motorcycles a year rolling out of a building that was, at that moment, the most productive motorcycle factory in the world. He had built something extraordinary from almost nothing: a toy engine, a failed steam car, a borrowed factory, and 30 years of relentless engineering effort had produced an empire that employed tens of thousands of workers, held patents for technologies that would define the automotive century, and dominated the global motorcycle market with a machine so well designed that the world's most successful companies copied it and built their own fortunes on the copy. The irony at the heart of the DKW story is not the irony of incompetence. It is the irony of absolute commitment. DKW did not fail because it was lazy or corrupt or short-sighted in the ordinary sense. It failed because it was completely sincere. The two-stroke engine was not an accidental dependency. It was a genuinely superior technology for the specific applications in which DKW had built its reputation. For a 40 cubic centimeter toy engine, nothing else made sense. For a lightweight motorcycle, the two-stroke's simplicity and power density were real advantages. For a small, affordable pre-war automobile, the technology held its own against all challengers. The tragedy was that these truths were time-limited, and DKW treated them as permanent. The three ironies that the DKW story leaves embedded in the record are these. First, the company that pioneered front-wheel drive, giving the automotive world the configuration that almost every modern passenger car uses, is remembered today, if at all, as the maker of an obsolete engine type. The technical achievement that defined the century bears someone else's name. Second, the motorcycle that DKW designed was so good that the companies which copied it, Yamaha, BSA, Harley-Davidson, survived and prospered, while DKW itself was absorbed and erased. The creator of the template went bankrupt, the copyists became empires. Third, the last DKW car, the F102, was re-engineered with a four-stroke engine and relaunched as an Audi. The car survived, the badge did not. The single moment when the tragedy became irreversible was not the F102's commercial failure, nor the sale to Volkswagen, nor the departure of Rasmussen in 1934. It was the boardroom meeting in Ingolstadt, probably in 1960 or 61, when Ludwig Krauss placed a four-stroke engine on the table and the DKW engineers looked at it and decided to build one more two-stroke instead. Everything after that was arithmetic. Today, in Ingolstadt, Audi AG occupies the site of what was once Auto Union's post-war factory. The company's revenues exceed 60 billion euros a year. The four rings of the logo, one for each of the founding companies, still carry the ring that represents DKW, the company whose engineering created the foundation for everything that came after. The ring is there, the name is not. In Schopau, the buildings are mostly still standing. The loading docks on the east side are beginning to come apart. Nobody has come to authorize the repairs because there is no longer anyone left to do so. The factory floor where 65,000 motorcycles a year once stood before their journey out into the world is empty and quiet, and full of the particular silence of things that were once the best in the world.